You're here because you love top level Force of Will content. And if you want more content from the Force of Will World Champion at least twice a week, make sure to hit that follow button. But that's enough of that. Getting into our top 5 cards of New Frontiers right now. This list is just in general, what I think are the most aggregate powerful cards. Not really thinking too much about like what the top decks are, although you will see these cards in the top decks as kind of just looking at a card in the vacuum of New Frontiers and saying, okay, where does this card stand in that format? And I think there is going to be a slight bias towards what dual stones we have. For example, a Kaguya is not on this list. I think that Kaguya is definitely one of the most powerful cards in the game right now, but it's not going to be here because it's so difficult to actually slot into a competitive deck. You almost need to build around it for it to be viable, because the dual stones that we have are just kind of pushing you towards a certain type of deck, right? Because you want to be either white, blue, white, red, black, red, that kind of stuff. So obviously number 5 here is going to be Seal of Lenneth. And that is mostly facilitated due to the dual stones. Again, like Kaguya could be a contender here, Lila or Alter could be up here, but instead Seal of Lenneth I think is just the most generically powerful removal spell. You kind of have to compare it to cards like Light of Raisin Revive and the white blue modal card. No, it's the white blue card sword art that like removes a resonator addition. I should really do research before I start talking, but it's a sword art that I don't play in any of my decks because I don't really play that much white blue, and it's just not as good I think as Seal of Lenneth because it costs more, and Seal of Lenneth is cheaper. It's in every single white deck when not every deck is going to be white blue or not every deck is going to be white red, and Seal of Lenneth has very specific powerful synergies with cards like Bastet and Dark Alice. Dark Alice being the more obvious one because it's in the color of white, but it's also good with Bastet, and Bastet can be seen slotted into Kaguya-based decks where you go green-white, or even just decks that are also Dark Alice decks because you get access to the 5-color wheel. So I think that Seal of Lenneth, because it hits Regalia, Resonators, it just kind of deals with everything that it could possibly want to deal with, and also has synergies, for example, with Dark Alice. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you play Seal of Lenneth, and you target an opponent's card, and then while you hold priority, you play Dark Alice to sacrifice the Seal of Lenneth, or you play Bastet to return the Seal of Lenneth to your hand. The Seal of Lenneth, like the Dark Alice or the Bastet, will resolve before the Seal of Lenneth removing something resolves. So if you're like looking at the chase, right, the Dark Alice resolves, the Seal of Lenneth is now off the field. Now Seal of Lenneth resolves and removes the thing. If you read Seal of Lenneth, it says when this card leaves the field, put a card from a removed area that was removed by this card into the field under its owner's control. That trigger no longer has a window to activate because the Seal of Lenneth is already off the field. So that will never trigger. So that's kind of like a cool thing you can do with those cards in particular. But in general, a deck like Melgus just isn't running a whole lot of addition or entity removal. So you can just kind of play this as a one-cost, like aggressive or anti-aggro tech, and it's also decent at removing something like Zeus Alice, where it doesn't have an enter ability to re-trigger if your opponent actually does have a way to deal with your Seal of Lenneth. I think the best answer to Seal of Lenneth right now is actually Seal of Lenneth, so it's kind of a paradox of just being a solid card, and it kind of just sneaks in there as my number 5, but it definitely, I think, is going to bottom out this list. Next on my list, we do have indeed Zeus Alice. I think this is most potent in Adam Seacard specifically because of the Adam Seacard Resonator, but in general, it can be slotted into pretty much any deck that's running Dark Alice, and I think it's mostly difficult to deal with. And the reason for that is partially supported by Light of Raisin Revive. The only way to really efficiently deal with Zeus Alice is by removing it from the game, either with Seal of Lenneth, or with Blade of Faith, or with the blue-white sword art addition, quick cast chant that we were talking about, or Light of Raisin Revive. But I think that any deck that's running Zeus Alice is going to, like, obviously you're white-blue, but you're probably going to be white-red-blue, just because I think base white is super powerful right now in New Frontiers. So I think the fact that the only way to deal with this card is kind of dealt with in color pretty easily by Light of Raisin Revive, I think it just is a pretty threatening win condition for almost any deck that wants to be base white, and then also fulfills the conditions of playing Resonator, Chant, Addition, and Magic Stones, and once again, especially in a deck like Adam Seacard specifically. Just one of the sweepers of the format, super cheap, has synergies with Misty Woods because it's a fairy tale. So, and again, that just synergizes completely with the Adam Seacard package, where it's a fairy tale, the Adam Seacard Resonator is a fairy tale, Dark Alice is a fairy tale, and then if you're being super ambitious, Kaguya is a fairy tale. So you have a really decent fairy tale package to put behind the Misty Woods, and just play Zeus Alice along with it. So I think this card is even better than Seal of Lenneth because of how disgusting of a win condition it is. Like, I don't even know if Adam Seacard would be a deck if this card didn't exist, and I do think that Adam Seacard's one of the best decks. But on top of that, Zeus Alice kind of just slots into even like non-white blue decks that just play Dark Alice and have the conditions to be able to fulfill it. So for that reason, I think Alice Zeus Incarnate takes number 4 slot. Moving on to number 3, we do in fact have Dark Alice, the Rabbit Princess. So Dark Alice, obviously, we've kind of talked about, just does a lot. A lot of people like to compare this card to Faithless Looting from Magic, and I actually strongly disagree with that comparison, because I think if Faithless Looting was in Force of Will, not only would it not be banned, it just straight up would not be played. I don't think that discarding is actually super good. Obviously for Dark Alice, the main like focus for it in like an Adam Seacard deck is to discard the Adam Seacard Resonator, but I think the most value you actually get out of this card is going to be taking things off of the field that would be dying anyway, and then getting to that 5-color ramp scenario where you're, sacking off a magic stone on top of dodging removal when you're already ramping with like Lila or Chant of Tranquility, and you're just getting to super, super late game stuff with your like also early game like cantripper. I think that sacking things on the field is just generally more valuable than discarding things out of your hand, but at the same time, like, discarding just cards that are dead in a matchup is not irrelevant. I just think that if you could only discard, this card would not be nearly as good. So I think that the access to 5 colors, the graveyard protection, and just the synergies that you see with Misty Woods, with Zeus Alice, and with Adam Seacard is what really pushes this card over the edge and puts it in the top 3. You still see it played in decks like Lenneth and Faria and even some Melgus decks, and I don't think the card is nearly as powerful there, but because it still does like get into like the 35th to 40th cards to go into those decks, I think it has to be considered one of the top 5 cards of the format for sure. Moving on to number 2, we have a pretty strong powerhouse in Perfect Loki. I don't think this card needs any explanation unless you actually haven't read it, in which case it needs like a way longer video than this to give an explanation. It's a one-sided board wipe. It's strongly facilitated by a lot of cards that exist in the format, like Dark Alice, like Harvesting Season, like Invitation to Purgatory, and it just locks your opponent. It does more than just be a one-sided board wipe. Like, if there was a 2-cost card, like at sorcery speed, that just said destroy your opponent's entire board, that like still might not even be as good as Perfect Loki. Even though Perfect Loki needs like the conditional setups to get them online, just the fact that Dark Alice helps protect your graveyard, Harvesting Season immediately sets up your graveyard, and then like just the fact that you can play this card on your opponent's turn, and then it keeps their board negged for the entire turn, and it hates J-Rulers, just like the upsides for this card just keep compounding and compounding. And then if you're playing Loki, the fact that you just have this like degenerate like late game engine of, oh, I can play my entire graveyard. Also, if you're for some reason Hanzo and you countered my Harvesting Season, I can just J-activate, and now I've got my 10 cards in graveyard to wipe your board for the rest of the game anyway. I think this card just does way too much. I think the colors are just a little bit weird, but not so weird that it's hard to actually play in this format. And I think you see a lot of the black decks just play like between 6 and 8 mono black stones, and then just play 4 white blue stones. And there's even Perfect Loki decks, like with Loki as the ruler, that will just be mono blue, and then or like play 1 or 2 black stones and also Shadow of Kronos, and then they'll just play the Fenrir to be able to do Judgment, and then they'll still play Harvesting Season, all this stuff to just make sure that Perfect Loki comes online. Even without blue-black duels, this card just is so easy to cast and so easy to turn online, and I'm really terrified that next set when we get blue-black duels that this card might just be running the entire format. I think one of the only things like keeping Loki in check right now is how this card can sometimes be difficult to play, or you can kind of gate your opponent out of it, because if they're playing an altar deck, you can like kill their mana transmuters, or they have to play around their 1 blue stone that they might see early game. If they're playing a blue deck, they have to find their black stone. Like there's a couple ways that like you know when it's coming, and sometimes like they just won't see it on time, especially against if you're playing Melgus and they don't see blue by like turn 4, you can just kill them no problem. But once we get dual stones for this, it's going to be pretty terrifying. But I still don't even think it's the best card in the format. It's very, very close, but what I do think is actually number one is going to be the Return of God. I think 2 mana, get anything you want, basically, is super powerful. I think there's enough ramp in the format with Lila by herself that it's easy to just turn this 2-cost card. And of course, you're only playing this in Loki, even though I've considered playing it in decks like Adam, where it's like, if I'm playing like Makoto or just like White Giant or Green Giant, even in like a green-white blue deck, like this card is just late game assurance. I would play this even for 4, but I think for the most part it's only super competitive in Loki specifically, and it's strongly facilitated off of the back of Athenia. I think there is merit to Mana Transmuter. I think there is merit to Perfect Loki. I think there is merit to even giants like Utgard Loki. But I think what really makes this card, just in my opinion, the single best card of the format is because of Athenia. So it was kind of like an honorable mention. I almost put Athenia on this list, but I do think that, this is the wrong Athenia, but it's the black-green one. Oh my goodness. Don't look at that. It's the black-green Athenia. I looked at the art and I was like, that's the right one. Don't worry about it, Ryan. This video is going to be great. It's the black-green Athenia, the 3-drop one. Athenia, God of the Harvest. So when you play Return of God and then you just get Athenia and you recover all of your stones, like it's super specific, right? Like you need to be playing Loki exactly. You need to be playing like even if you weren't playing Loki, you would need to at least be playing a Divinity Ruler for Athenia to like be relevant and online. But I think this card just does so much and is just so disgustingly powerful when you cast it that it actually just like trumps everything else. Like this card in Loki is better than the versatility you get out of Dark Alice across like 7 different decks. I just think this card is disgustingly powerful. I think you can play it. I think this like facilitates mono blue or mono blue-ish Loki. I think it facilitates Alter Loki. And as you saw, like we don't have Alter or Lila like on this list at all. I think that deck would be actually hot garbage, and I think most Alter decks are actually kind of tier 2 compared to like the Adam Seacard decks or even the Melgus decks. I think it's strictly Return of God that just makes that deck insane. Just 2 cost, get out way more than 2 cost worth of value if you play Athenia or Mana Transmuter. And Mana Transmuter is good, but I think like life total can be pressured by decks like Melgus or Zeus Alice. I think that Athenia is really the big turning point on that. So I think Return of God is the best card in the format, and if you don't want to play an Alter deck, if you don't want to play a Turbo J-Activate Loki deck, I think there's still just a lot of room to just kind of mess around with Return of God deck, like Kaguya, Chant of Tranquility. Like if you look at the green-white decks that were at Worlds, and you play Calico Cat and Kaguya, and then you take all the white stones and just turn them into white-blue stones and play Loki and play Return of God, like I think that's a deck. That's how good I think this card is, and I really think this is kind of underexplored because people are still looking into the traditional ways of playing Loki, either with the Alter or just like J-Activate, but I think this card facilitates so many strategies, and above all, above the versatility of Dark Alice, above the absolute degeneracy of Perfect Loki, the Resonator itself, I think Return of God is the best card in New Frontiers. So that's what I have to say. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the description below. I'd love to talk about it. I think there's a lot of really interesting runner-ups like Kaguya, like Lila, like Alter, like Leviathan. So let me know what you think should be in the top 5 list and make a comment below. And as always, stay effing classy, boys. Thanks for watching.